and took back and had a look at it, and I went, you can't do that. That would be sacrilege. So, but then I was looking.
Ronn Dunnett is the founder of Dunnett Classic Drums and a master drum builder who is known for making some of the finest and most innovative drums on the market. And he makes them one by one, all by hand, in his workshop in British Columbia. But what you may or may not know is that in 2006, Ronn acquired the intellectual property rights and many items from the estate belonging to George Way, one of the most consequential pioneers of the modern drum set, and the founder of the George Way Drum Company that eventually became Camco Drums. Since then, he's been on a mission to faithfully recreate the entire George Way catalog and to move the brand forward. I caught up with Ronn recently when he was here in Los Angeles, and we sat down to discuss how and why he came to acquire the George Way assets and his plans for the future. So without further ado, here's that interview.
Take it away.
Start from the beginning where I got into this. As we've been talking about, I had been working on a different business model for Dunnett, looking to try and make a midline or an entry level, and part of that process was designing a badge, and I had taken the George Way Cloud badge because I liked the shape and had put Dunnett inside it, and took back and had a look at it, and I went, you can't do that. That would be sacrilege. So, but then I was looking, got curious, and started to do some research on who actually owned the trademark. I mean, the assumption had always been that DW had, but research actually proved that, like, no, nobody owned it. And just by the way intellectual property works, it was available. George hadn't used it. He had no family, and so it was basically available to use. And so I registered it. George ultimately started in Edmonton, Alberta. He started in Canada. His job as a drummer in the vaudeville era took him up to Edmonton, where he worked at the Pantages Theatre. While he was there was a boilerman, a caretaker, who had some skills, and they started making metal snare drums under the name the Advanced Drum Company.
The Advanced Drum Company, absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so that was Canada's first drum company, and so he worked there, and they had some success. So much so that he got the attention of Ulysses Levy. And in with George's estate, there's all these communications in the language of the day, which is really fascinating. It's almost Shakespeare in a way. And Levy said, hey, I know you're doing probably really well on your own, but if you'd like to, I'd love to have you here. So Edmonton was where he met his wife Elsie, and so they packed up, and there were a couple of chain of events, stuff that happened along the way, but they moved to back to the States, and that's where he started working with Levy. And then he eventually went on to work for, I may be wrong here, but I think he worked for every major drum company at one point in time or the other.
Seemed that way, yeah.
Slingerland, Ludwig, Levy,
Rogers for a minute.
Yeah, Rogers for a minute, and came up with some really, fantastic ideas.
But he started another drum company post all that. Wasn't there a George?
And that's eventually, after he had been through all of it, he
Yeah.
decided to start the George Way Drum Company. And as you mentioned in the story, establishing that company involved, probably back in the day, it wasn't as easy as it would be now for someone to, every day there's a new Joe Blow custom drum company, because all of those parts and pieces are readily accessible, and all you have to do is look at a screen, and that's the extent of your R&D. But back in that day, it was George's little black book, who makes this, who makes that. And so, he started the George Way Drum Company, and had actually even the lug design, which I like to talk about, because when he was with Levy, he designed the original lug, which really didn't look like a turret. It was more like an Art Deco design. And I've talked to Don Lombardi about this, and there's two stories about how that design came up. One is that it was actually based on a saxophone cap that, and I've never seen one, that saxophone players used to put over to cover a certain part of it. And the one that I heard was George was sitting at his desk one day, and it was when they had milk pods, little wooden ones, and he had been stacking them up, and that's how he was like, oh, that's the shape. Either way, because of the influence of the day was Art Deco, and so he came up with this Art Deco design that happened to have this round little piece in the middle. I don't know why he decided to change it. I have some ideas. Maybe it was because he was thinking about machining the lugs first instead of die casting, but when he started George Wade, he created a variation of his original design and came up with what is now known as the turret lug. And so, at the time, George had been, well, you know the story, you've already told it. George had been working with Camco, who was basically, they were running screw machine parts and stuff like that, and he had a business relationship, and John Rochon had a lot, I think he was fairly well-to-do, and George needed money and brought in friends as investors and got John in, and ultimately, in what you can only call a hostile takeover, he lost control of his company.
Now, post Camco, didn't he start another drum company under just his initials?
Yes, he did. It was GHW. He kind of took Ludwig's lead, because when Ludwig couldn't make drums because they had sold
WFL,
they started calling it WFL, and he went, well, that sounds, so he started GHW. And that was the funny thing, because when I was trying to secure the IP, I didn't want anybody to come knocking on my door and going, hey, so I made sure George Wade was covered, but GHW was not. And I'm going to draw a blank on his name, but at one point George had sold GHW to a guy in Elkhart who ran a music store. And ultimately, I tracked him down. He was very old at the time. I spent an hour on the phone with him. It was a great conversation, and he told me his life story. And at the end of that conversation, I said, well, I would very much like to buy the brand from you, and I promise you I'll take really good care of it. I don't think he was really concerned about that. He said, well, I think I gave George this much for it. He goes, I'll tell you what, write me a check for $1,000 and it's yours. And I swear before the phone hung up, he had the check in his hand, and so I bought all the rights to GHW as well.
Were they planning on ever doing anything with it, or were you just going to hold on to it until...
No, I don't know, because he ran a sheet music store in Elkhart, so I don't even know why he had decided. He probably didn't pay George a whole lot of money for it. I think he paid him $2,500 is what he said, because really it was just, at that point, GHW, I don't think he ever made drums under that. It was.
Yeah, so I was gonna say, I don't think I've ever seen any.
It was a distribution company.
Oh, okay, and that's.
And so he bought it and thought, oh well, maybe I'll sell. And you saw that picture of George laid out with all the parts, and he was selling cymbals and sticks, and I mean, in retirement, after you've been through the ringer with all those drum companies, it's like, you know what? I think I just want to take it easy and sell some sticks and stuff like that. But what a legacy, man.
So now you're carrying the torch. So want to tell us what's happening going forward?
Well,
whatever you can.
You're right. I've seen some. I've seen some drum brands like Slingerland just dragged through the mud, and I'm like going, I am very happy that I got a chance before anybody else to sort of preserve that. That heritage and legacy of the company, because it deserved, and he made some great drums. So I started with snare drums with the Tuxedo lug, reproduced all the parts verbatim, exactly how George had done them, because I really wanted to stay as close as possible to the originals. But at some point, the starting point, but you have to sort of look and go, well, if George had kept going and had made drums throughout this history, where would he be today? And so at some point you have to start creating updates. And
he did things differently than his own time. He would probably do different things today.
But I'm always guided by, when I did the precision throw off, I'm like going, what would George think? Would he like this? And if I hear him in my head going, I like that, I'm like, let's do that. And if he's like, oh no, kid, But it's pretty easy when you have the template. He's already laid it out for you, and all you got to do is. Nobody has the ability to, get intellectual property on the shape of a lug. There are certain specific designs that are recognized, and in the case of using George's original design, it was significantly different than anything else out there. And I was of the opinion, and I think a lot of other people were, that there's no risk of having a George Way or a Camco drum being confused with a DW or a Heyman or anything else. I mean, just look, you just look at the badge and it's like, yeah, it's different. And even collectors, they just, they can see the shape of the badge and they'll go, well, it's either a George Way or a Camco.
Yeah.
With George Way, I've pretty much completed his entire catalog. The only thing that I really want to do to finish it off is do a double tom holder, because I think that was iconic part of how a Camco kit looked. And again, that's where you're in that trade-off of like, do I make it exactly how it was, or do I sort of improve it? So I'm working on that. And as for Camco, who knows? The brand is still out there, and anything could happen. It's a crazy industry, so fingers crossed. That might be nice to see some Camco drums making a reappearance.
I'd like it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for being here and this beautiful setting. And he's got a plane to catch back to BC.
Going back to Canada.
All right, man. Thanks for watching.
Drum.